Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
I think it's always interesting listening to your profile being read. And you think, trying to reflect on all of those moments. Because when I do reflect on it, it's quite interesting to think about all of the range of activities you end up getting involved with. In terms of a little bit more information about my background, and obviously Palmerston North is where I grew up. Both my mum and dad were pretty keen on a family, and we ended up with 5 boys. So I've got four brothers. We adopted another brother and 2 sisters. So we end up with quite a big family. But There was a 6.5 year gap between my oldest brother and my youngest brother. So you can imagine with a 6.5 year gap, not a lot of gap between us. And we grew up in a pretty robust environment. Boxing and fighting was always top of the pops at our house. And sport played a really big part in our upbringing. And I was lucky enough to get involved with boxing, which took me on a whole different pathway, which really is when I think about the discussion today around leadership is changing. That's a good starting point, is to understand where it started from. And for me, sport was really that avenue that kicked things into play for me around leading and being in part of a wider group, even though boxing was an individual sport.
Yeah, cool. And sounds like it was really exciting times with siblings and that, and growing up together with them. Hey, for you, how did you get into leadership?
Oh, it's a really good question, Dennis. I was taking some notes earlier and I'm thinking, how did I get into leadership? And the honest truth is I fell into it. And when I look back on my career and in my office, I've got one of my photos. And when I was 12 years of age, I was the captain of the rep team for Manawatu for softball. I was actually the national champion in boxing as well. But in the softball team, that was the first time that I was in a leadership role in terms of being the captain of the team. And I suppose ever since then, I've always had this level of expectation from others around me kind of taking a lead role. And again, like I said, I don't think it doesn't feel like I ran towards it, but it was something that was in front of me quite frequently. So I kind of, when I think about my other parts of my career, when I moved into the health sector, being a young Māori male in public health in New Zealand was quite novel. It was mainly women that did the health promotion type work rather than men. And again, so it thrust me into, again, a leadership role because of the uniqueness of me being in that sector. But because I was boxing and obviously training to go to the Olympics, I spent a lot of time being contacted by schools. Schools would ring me and say, Trevor, can you come in and talk to our students about goal setting, and you're off to the Olympics and what's that like? And I really took advantage of that opportunity and went and talked to schools. And I developed a lot of skills during those sessions around storytelling and connection and self-awareness and developing my emotional intelligence to try and read the audience. And I think that was a real big grounding for me, was being thrust in front of groups of people to tell stories and to talk and try and string everything together to try and get to a point to inspire a group of young people that I was in front of. So that's a really cool thing to reflect on in terms of how far I've come, but also how far there is still to go.
Yeah, great. And also influencing so many people as well, because I love to see what their stories are now as a result of actually hearing somebody like yourself in the past as well, which would be pretty interesting to hear. Hey, Trevor, who's your favorite leader? Now, this question here is, it could be someone who's alive or from history. So who's your favorite leader and why?
It's a pretty big question because, again, I think it's hard to pinpoint any one
Mhm.
individual. I think of over the years when I think about leaders and mentors and people that have come in and out of my life who I've been able to learn something from or take something from, it has been quite vast. And I've been fortunate when I think about when the student's ready, the teacher turns up. And I've been fortunate that a number of teachers who are leaders have turned up in my life. But the person that I'm going to talk about is a guy by the name of Amster Reedy. Amster passed away in a few years ago now in 2012. What's it, 8 years? Full name is New Amsterdam Reedy. And he was named after a merchant sea carrier that took the Māori battalion to the war. And he was the eldest child of 18. And I
18.
18 children. He was the eldest of 18.
Wow.
And he became my mentor, and I really looked up to him as a leader. He was an amazing man, both in terms of his cultural knowledge and the depth of his cultural knowledge, but also the way in which he was able to connect through his humility. He was inspiring, but he did so much for me and created so many really good opportunities for me. And he was the one that said to me one day, he was correcting me. I'd made a mistake with something and he corrected me. And I felt really embarrassed that I was being corrected. And he said to me, because he could see that I felt a bit of shame and a bit of embarrassment. And he said to me, the way to think about it is I'm correcting you because I want the best for you. I want you to be better. And ever since then, I've been far more comfortable with getting things wrong. I've been far more comfortable with people providing feedback or providing input in terms of how I could do things differently or better. And I haven't, so that hasn't been a block or a barrier for me. He was an incredible individual. I could tell you stories for days, Dennis. We traveled together overseas. We did some amazing work in the cultural space with the New Zealand Olympic team and different organizations that he and I both worked for, because we ended up joining up together and working quite closely on a range of projects that were about health and well-being. But when I'd be sitting in the room from a cultural perspective, and there'll be a cultural piece or a welcome to our process. And Amster's was amazing in terms of his level of cultural knowledge and understanding of all the rituals and so forth. And he would kick me under the table. I'm not sure if that's very leadership-like, but he'd kick me under the table and go, hey, he'd look at me and I'd look at him. And the kick under the table was, that he wasn't going to stand up. He was kicking me to say, hey, can you reply? And again, there was the challenge around going, oh, okay, it's my turn. He wants, and again, when I think about it, he was creating more opportunities for me to stand and show what I was capable of, but with his support and with him as a safety net to make sure that he was there to catch me if I needed it. And to me, that was amazing.
Thank you, Dennis. Delighted to be here and chuffed for you with episode 50. What an honor.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a real pleasure. Thank you. So it's been really cool. Adrian, so I've given a brief introduction on you. Would you like to share a little bit more about your background, please?
Yeah, thank you. I was born in the United Kingdom, had my formative years growing up in Southeast Asia in Singapore, a real dream time that was as a youngster in the 80s, and then really moved to Australia in my teens. So I think in terms of my identity, having been through high school in Australia, university, I feel very much like an Australian. I think I still call Sydney home whilst I reside out here in the Bay Area in California. And my own studies took me into behavioral sciences psychology. So I guess that's my degree. But I've always had a passion for people and why we relate the way that we do, why we make the decisions that we do, what drives us. And yet, despite that passion, I found myself stumbling into work with Compaq Computers back in 99. And that was after a little bit of a stint with PepsiCo in customer service and then performance and training. And I always thought these little 2-year stints just to get some experience and a little bit of exposure. And I'd probably pop out and work out what I really wanted to do with my life. But the ball just kept rolling and I enjoyed every moment. I think beyond that little background piece, I am, I guess, a person of the planet, as I like to say. I'm a quarter Chinese, a quarter Indian, and half English. So naturally a fan of diversity and the strength that it does bring. And I guess all the cultural nuances that are so gorgeous, basically. And yes, a family. So wife, 2 girls. And that's probably what matters most to me, in addition to supporting and encouraging people to, in essence, be their best selves.
Excellent. It sounds like a real rich career that you've led and so forth in different countries and regions around the world. How did you actually get into leadership?
Excited back at high school. During the school process, we had a cadet corps, play army. I can say that respectfully. I mean, there was rank that you could aspire to attain. I figured I'd give that a shot and aspired to be a lance corporal of a section. And then actually was entrusted to be a corporal. So that sort of surprised me to begin with. And it relished that year. It was great. To go after 7 people, camping, first aid, snake bite treatments, bivouacs, and more. And I began to enjoy just that accountability to help others enjoy the experience. I think that was at its core. And then that kind of continued in terms of being entrusted with more and more seniority, more responsibilities to lead platoons, companies, and so forth. And then similarly, towards the end of school, I was entrusted with school captaincy. And I think at the time, I was a reluctant receiver of these responsibilities, if you like. But what I also appreciated in terms of my identity was the capacity to kind of close my eyes, take a breath, and then step into it. And then really relish that responsibility. But again, most importantly, this accountability to help others get the most out of their experiences, be it at school, in the context of the year, what was being experienced, the cadet corps, football teams, and more. And so that was really my first exposure to it. And I maybe thought it was a one and done. I did that, and let's get out there and live life. I was into music, playing in bands. I never aspired to be a leader per se. But as I journeyed into compact computers in particular, and an opportunity came up to lead a team, I actually didn't put my hand up. And I was questioned about that from a leader at the time, who to this day I have such significant respect for. And she simply said, "Why didn't you?" And I said, "I've only been on the job for 3 months. There's still lots for me to learn in my current responsibilities. I didn't feel the time was right." And she said, "But Adrian, there was a couple of other people that put up their hands that started at the same time you did." I was like, "Really? Oh my goodness. That would have been a lost opportunity for me not to at least have helped others more broadly." And that was a lesson learned. Don't wait. Raise your hand. Reach out and at least express your interest or let people know that you have a desire to make a broader difference and to help. And so the next time a role came around, of course, I raised my hand and I was given that accountability to lead a team. I was very young. I was in my early 20s, 24, maybe 25. And the team, of course, were invariably in their late 20s, early 30s. And so there was an immediate natural tension point in terms of, hang on a second, who are you? Tell me what to do. Sure. And that's what I realized pretty quickly. Hang on, I'm not actually here to tell you what to do. I'm here to help you succeed. My job is to make sure you have all the tools and the support, the backing. You got a place to soundboard, to ideate a little. And I'm someone that will make sure I'm here for you. And that began to soften that tension and build some trust. And I began to realize maybe that was my little formula for success, ensuring people understand how much I care. And then I'm basically here. My job, my paid job is to make sure they succeed fundamentally. And I've, in essence, carried that through into every accountability I've been entrusted with. So that's how it began once I stepped into a corporate context, basically.
Yeah, beautiful. And really quite interesting. I've got a couple of questions here. One is, how many snake bite treatments did you do?
Fortunately, none in the real world, yeah. But
yeah, that's good. So I quite like what you talked about, closing your eyes and taking a breath and then stepping into that responsibility, which is really good. But I think the important thing here is as well is that the 2 questions I got, one is raising your hand and stepping up and doing that. How important is that for leaders to make sure that they're doing that on a regular basis?
I think it's very important because if you don't express what it is that you want, you don't help others see what you have the potential to do or how you'd like to contribute, then you could miss out on that opportunity. And I think that's potentially a risk, whether it's in terms of your own career development or in terms of your ability to garner feedback, because you might miss out and be curious as to why. And then you have an opportunity to get guidance in terms of what that why might be. And it could be a lack of experience. It could be they're not quite the right timing. Who knows? But I think, again, between the feedback that you garner or the responsibility you could be entrusted with, it's going to be a gain for you. I do think it's important for people to raise their hand and clearly state what it is they feel they have the capacity to do. And it doesn't always have to be about leadership. It could be to take on a new project, take a risk and go build some new product or system. And that's what really grows us. It's those experiences ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so the second question there was based on what you're saying just before, was that there seems to be leaders who do struggle, and sometimes they call it the imposter syndrome. They struggle in the fact that they've been promoted to the role, and there are people there who may be more experienced in tenure in the way of being in that team a lot longer, or the organization, or they may be more of a bigger age, if I can put it that way, than the actual leader itself. And that leader doesn't have to be like a new frontline leader. It could be right through to the executive levels as well. So what's one or two things you would say to somebody like that? And I know your approach was, I'm here to help you succeed, but would there be anything else that you would offer up to anyone else to help them succeed as in that transition of actually taking on that new role?
Yeah, I got some fun stories here. Based on my own experiences, I feel that I suffer from imposter syndrome to an extent, and I've found good coping mechanisms to work through it. But for me, being entrusted with responsibilities, whether it was at school, and I guess how you interpret your environment shapes a lot of your thinking over time. And I know back then I was like, who, me, what? A corporal? I wanted a lance corporal. Oh, wow. I didn't expect that. That's nice. Let me see what I can now do. And it just continued into my career in Compaq and HP, where through various promotions or being entrusted with new responsibilities, I was always a little surprised. And again, relative to a lot of my peers, I was relatively young, 24, 25, 26. I was leading a go-to-market group at 28. Most of my peers were in their 50s. And I kept saying, gosh, I have to pedal fast to do this. I am not good enough. I don't have enough skills. I'm having to double down all the time. And on the outside, I was cool and calm. But on the inside, I was working super hard. And I sat down with a mentor one day, and they hit me right between the eyes because I was babbling on about all this responsibility at such a young age. And, how am I going to do it? And I'm pedaling so fast. And they simply said two things. How old are you? And I think at the time of this conversation, I just turned 30. I'd just become a director. And she said, what have you really done? And I said, what do you mean? I've done all these amazing things. And she said, I know a lot of self-made millionaires who are 30. I know a lot of CEOs who set their own businesses who are 30. I know a lot of people that what have you actually done? And I was like, oh my goodness. And in an instant, I thought, you have got to get over yourself, Adrian. What you're really being entrusted with, it's pretty simple. It's quite straightforward. Why are you spending all this time worrying about whether you can or can't do something? So that helped in a way. It was a bit of tough love, you could say. I got a little sweaty at the time when that feedback was given to me, but it did create a shift that elevated my sense of certainty around getting engaged and spending less time worrying about whether I can or can't.
Yep.
And then equally around the same time, particularly as I started taking on more executive accountabilities, I was also told, Adrian, the person that has entrusted you with this title or this scope or this budget, they've done that because they believe you can do it. They wouldn't have given you that responsibility if they didn't think you could do it. So why would you waste another second worrying about whether you can or can't? Get on with it and enjoy the process. And that was the ultimate shifter because I was like, oh my goodness, that's right. They wouldn't have promoted me if they didn't think I had a chance of succeeding. So let me not second guess myself for a second longer. Let's roll up sleeves, get engaged, link arms with the team, with my peers, and go make this happen. And then the joy started to come back into it. I was always energetic, always enthusiastic, but the genuine joy showed up. And then again, that made it easier. And I think that made me a more authentic and more compelling leader.
So I grew up in the moving industry. I got to work on a moving truck growing up, which is what you do when dad owns the moving business.
Yep.
I don't recommend it. Don't go work on a moving truck. But I gained a really great appreciation of that side of the industry, that part of life early on. I went to college. I graduated with a degree in marketing, which has always been my passion. And I ended up getting a job for an event marketing company. Mercedes-Benz was our big client. We did all their sports marketing. So the Masters, US Open, great gig out of college. But eventually I just found that I was ended up golf tournaments for rich people, which was not really how I wanted to lead my life. I felt like purpose was missing. And in terms of Move for Hunger, we never really meant to start a nonprofit. I didn't know anything about hunger. I didn't know anything about food waste. If you would have asked me 11 years ago if I'd start my own organization, I would have told you you're out of your mind. But here it was, people every day when they're moving, they don't know what to do with the food. It was a common question that came up. What should I do with this? Or they were throwing it away or they were leaving it. So we really just started by asking people if they wanted to donate it. We were there anyway and brought it to the food bank, and then Move for Hunger was born.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And that's a tremendous sort of service that you're doing. And it's just a great idea. And yeah, sometimes these ideas are just sitting in front of us. We just don't we're not expecting to do it, and then it pops out. But hey, go back to when you're saying about being on the moving truck with your dad and helping out there as a kid and so forth. Was there one or two things that you learnt in relation to about working with your dad and what it's like to be as a kid working with your parents and things like that? Did you learn anything around there?
Yeah. So one, my dad, who worked with his twin brother and my other uncle. So yeah, I got a lot of family early on.
Yeah.
They were incredibly entrepreneurial. The moving business was core, but they built other businesses around it, warehousing. They built some self-storage. They really tried to do new things, and learning and seeing them try ideas, succeed in some and fail in others, but still find ways to have success. I think that was really important. And then physically being on the truck and doing some of the grunt work, as you'll call it. I think it was super humbling because even though my dad was the boss of the company, like I was no better than anybody else that was out there. And I think that's a really important to be able to, as you're growing in business, be able to do it all and know that every single role within a company, as trivial as you may think it is in the moment, until you do it, that's really where you get to understand where the opportunities for doing better really live.
Yeah, great. Because the reason I asked you that question is very similar to my background as well. We grew up in the coffee industry, and at the age of 7, here I was at the shop working with my parents as well. And so I think for myself, and I learned a lot working in that environment around the family, but also, as you said, there was the boss and there was my role. I had to do things, and it wasn't anything special in the sense of I didn't get any special treatment because I was the son, as you're saying. But then the other thing too is I think the biggest learning for me was seeing the struggle that they went through and having their business, and every day it wasn't rosy. You had to hustle and so forth. But then the other one was the work ethic. And I think that was really quite strong for us as being taught about work ethic and then getting on with things too. So, yeah, fabulous experiences, which has been really good. So question for me is, how did you get into leadership? What was your background there?
Yeah, I think it happened accidentally, to be quite honest. Certainly, I was involved in college and took some leadership roles in student government where I could, which was always fun. When I went to the first marketing agency, I certainly was not in a leadership role in any way, shape, or form, but try to stand out to impress your boss. But as I went into and launched Move for Hunger, you almost become this immediate leader / entrepreneur, although you don't necessarily know entirely what you're doing, right? You're looking to other leaders, other mentors, trying to figure out what is the template, process, best practice that I can integrate to go faster, better now. So I was very fortunate to have some early mentors, the Do Something organization, when I was just getting started, through my family, to be able to believe in me and help build up that confidence. Because I remember when I quit my job, all of my friends thought I was out of my mind. But I feel like I had gained enough self-confidence at that point to understand that if I fail, I can always find another job and I can always do something else. But I also don't want to fail. So I'm really gonna give this my all to figure out the best way to make this succeed. But I think I've certainly learned a lot along the way and made plenty of mistakes as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think here, listeners, the key here that Adam's sharing is the fact that we should surround ourselves with the right people, some mentors, identify them, get them around you to help you with your confidence, to help you see things differently possibly, and then take some of those bold moves that you might want to do, like he did with about leaving his job and to go off to do some other things. And it was risky, but he knew that it was more of like calculated risk because he knew he could go out and get another job. So it was really quite interesting to see that.
And as I've grown in my career, I felt people actually want to talk to you if you don't have this crazy agenda. Like people are actually pretty open to having conversations. And on very many occasions, I've reached out to CEOs or CMOs and really big organizations that then given me 30, 60 minutes of their time just through a LinkedIn message. And I've been very grateful for those, and some have developed into some really nice friendships.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And what I see, Adam, too, and I presume that's what you're just getting at here as well, is that the higher they are in the organization, they are humble and they are willing to actually give that time to you to invest in people. So I think it's a fantastic thing for sure. Hey, here's a really interesting question for you. Who is your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or can be from history. So who's your favorite leader and why?
That is a challenging one, I will say, but I'd say one of my favorites is probably Sir Richard Branson. And I think the reason why I am always inspired by the marketer in him, seeing his story as like a dyslexic young boy and how he was able to start up all of these different businesses, many of which failed, but many have found success, while also maintaining his stance in terms of trying to create a better world and include some social, really just that social responsibility into a lot of the core of what he's doing. So that mix has been very inspiring for me. And even as old as this guy is now, he's still going out and innovating and trying to build rocket ships. So it's really been amazing to see.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and great to see him out there on the front of the curve, trying to do things and innovate and keep going, which is brilliant. Yeah, it's brilliant to see. Oh, thanks for sharing. That's a good one, Sir Richard Branson.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.